Hi, I'm Saran Fox.
I'm Dan Watanabe, and this is Dan and Saran
Take on Hollywood.
with our guest, the ever controversial Michael Gonzalez.
That's a great experience.
Our topic today is actually going to be the article which you can link to below. And in that article, it's a discussion of how the millennial generation doesn't pay attention to old Hollywood. And one of the reasons Saran and I brought Michael is because even though he's not quite a millennial, he's pretty darn close. So we're going to debate this topic with him. And let me actually start out with my position. I frankly think this article is a pile of Barbra Streisand. And the reason I say that is because because in the article it is knocking the millennial generation, which seems to be a big fashion among a lot of newspaper articles and magazine articles. And I'm actually kind of tired of it. As an instructor in film and television, I've got to tell you that the students that I have, by and large, are every bit as cognizant and knowledgeable about old film history as any of us were, who were from the baby boomer generation. And further to that, when I was going to USC back in the early 80s, I can honestly tell you that just as many people would be as horrified at the thought of having to sit through 42nd Street as your average millennial today. So I am of the firm belief that a lot of the statistics that are quoted in this article are written to an audience of older Alta-Cocker teachers such as myself. And some of the statistics it points out, for example, is that only 28% of supposed millennials are aware of a movie like Casablanca. And I've got to say that from my perspective, that is a huge, huge number. Can you imagine that? That something that was made 75 years ago still has people who whose grandparents weren't born when the movie was made can still appreciate it, or that only 50% know of Gone with the Wind. I've got to tell you that going back 80 years, I can't tell you much about anything of pop culture.
Well, you know what the article didn't do? It didn't say your average millennial who goes to the movies or streams or watches on their computer, and a lot of the people, the young people that we deal with, which are millennials who are into film history, who are studying screenwriting, and how much how big their knowledge is, and the percentage goes way up when you address the millennials who are interested in film and film history. So to blanketly say, to make a blanket statement about millennials, I think is really, really unfair. There are people in our generation, in my generation, who have no idea what the films of the 20s were. You know, who have no knowledge or experience and haven't seen a lot of Buster Keaton or Howard Lloyd, the early films of Garbo, you know, Hal Roach comedies. So I think you could probably say this almost for every generation.
I think it's absolutely true. So Michael, can you tell us what your feelings are about that article?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the 28%, but also was it 50% were aware or had seen Gone with the Wind, correct? That's a huge number for a film that, again, that how many years ago?
It was 1939.
Yeah, 1939. Like, and today people are aware of it. It's I think
you realize that the Civil War is closer to Gone with the Wind than Gone with the Wind is today.
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And millennials are and either aware of it, know of it, seen it. You know, so yeah, and same thing I'm sure with maybe goes for Wizard of Oz, and just other other films, your Casablancas, you know, whatever. So I think I tend to agree more with what you're saying. Is I think that it's it's the older Alta-Cockers again taking a shot at us younger whippersnappers.
Well, I look at it this way too, that for someone who's entering film school this year, the distance between Star Wars and them is the same distance that I had between me and Star Wars and Gone with the Wind.
Yep.
So I mean that's
the
a
original,
big
not Phantom Menace.
Exactly. Exactly.
Let's make
Yeah,
sure.
we'll be sure that.
I that's why I put that up.
Yes.
I think that when Dan and I were the age of the millennials and much younger, we share we have very different takes on films, but we share a great love of film and an appreciation and a sense of history. You know, when I was 13 years old, I saw Citizen Kane for the first time on television, and I don't want to say it changed my life, but it opened up the possibilities to me artistically. There was a hint at what the world out there was like, because when you're 13, you're starting to turn into a young adult, and yet you're still a child. And so I grew up in a house that watched film and television, and so I was born into a family that talked about film, and I saw old movies. That was an advantage for me. And I know that there are millennials who grew up in the same kind of households. And the thing about the incoming students, because often I have guest lectured and talked to students in Dan's classes, when I say how many of you have seen Casablanca, or some of them haven't even seen The Godfather, I just encourage them to get a film vocabulary, that here's an opportunity for them to be exposed to these things and not to judge them. But I tell them, if you're interested in screenwriting or a career in entertainment, you need to get into your DNA, the vocabulary of film, and you have to do your, plus it's so enjoyable to sit down and watch. And I also want to say, I think The Wizard of Oz, I'm just wondering, a lot of these millennials, I'll bet they've seen The Wizard of Oz, because for many years it was on television every year.
No, that's for our generation.
That's for our generation.
No. It was still on. It was still on TMC or even
CBS used to show it.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering how, because I think The Wizard of Oz crosses
Many
generations,
generations.
crosses many
Absolutely.
generations.
And one thing that I think I want to point out, and I think this is what kind of irks me a little bit, is I think one of the reasons why the number's so high with some of these, as far as like, or is the flip side that the numbers are higher than what they should be for like millennials being aware that the movie exists, is the advent of the internet. The advent of the internet, streaming, other services that make it easier to see some of these films, or more accessible for a generation that has no idea that, oh, what is this? Oh, my mom used to watch this all the time.
I want to bring up something, because even I wasn't raised on MTV. I was an adult when it first started. But even when I watched films like from the 60s and 70s, and I'm not into the quick cutting, and I have a lot of patience, but there are times when I watch some of these films that I say, all right, the scene is over, cut. And I don't think it's because of the MTV thing. I think it's because, why do you think it is? Because I can't quite figure it out, because there are times when I say, as the editor in me is like, okay, this scene, it's time to move on, and they just keep going. I wonder if what's going on with the millennials is a lot of these older films require more patience to sit through scenes that are longer. What's your take on that, Dan?
It's strange because it depends on decade. If you're talking about the 30s and 40s, the cutting rhythm is actually very, very similar to the cutting rhythm we have today. It's usually follows the same traditional wide, medium, close.
Yeah.
And then over the shoulders, the cut in the middle of the line. It's very, very classical filmmaking. When you're looking at stuff that comes from the 60s and 70s, one of the reasons that they look so slow and they feel so pokey is because they were very heavily inspired by European cinema. Because European cinema was coming in and it had this sense of realism that the filmmakers were trying to break the Hollywood mode of, no, we're going to almost aggressively tell you what's important to look at. So they allowed a scene to play so that you could discover the important thing. Look at a movie like An Unmarried Woman, which has a scene in it where Jill Clayburgh and her daughter sit at the piano and play Baby I'm a Man, I'm a Lonely Man. It's one take, it's a long shot, and it's a completely unnecessary scene to the movie. So your average younger viewer, and even one of us older viewers, will look at that and go, come on, why do we have this scene? Why do we have her friends and she getting together and talking about which one of them liked Rita Hayworth? It's like, come on, we want to get on with the story.
It feels very self-indulgent in a way.
But it was trying to break what Hollywood was doing. And if you look at the new independent filmmakers, what are they going back to? They're going back to that, allowing the audience to discover what the meaning is. They're trying to, and maybe this is caused by the rise of YouTube and the rise of a lot of generations of new filmmakers who don't know that vocabulary or who are struggling their way through it. And so there's that rawness and that sense of capturing real life.
And I just, back when we've talked about Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate, which came out in '67, I'm thinking about the energy There was this, they captured the a specific kind of raw American energy that hadn't really been seen before. And that was followed by The Wild Bunch, which had that raw, very specifically American energy. I watched Room at the Top, the 1959 film with Lawrence Harvey and Simone Signoret. It won her an Oscar for Best Actress last night. And the energy in the film, it's a tragic love story and about a man who wants to ascend to a different class through marriage. And this is England in the 50s, where it's just impossible to rise above what you were born into. And it's a wonderful study in ambition, unbridled ambition and the disastrous consequences thereof. And it also had a certain kind of energy, an English energy with his friends, and he belonged to a theater group. And so there's something about a film where there's energy, and then there's, like when you look at Bonnie and Clyde, the quiet times, like the scenes in the bedroom with the two of them, and the scene with her mother at the picnic, so that a really great film can have this incredible energy and forward movement, and then it has the ability to take its time.
And then there's I Will for Now.
Yeah.
One of these forgotten movies of the late 70s.
Who was in that?
Diane Keaton and Elliot Gould.
Oh, Bob and Alice, they were Alice and Ted.
Yes.
No, yeah, Alice and Ted, Bob and Carol, Ted and Alice.
But it's Diane Keaton. Sorry.
Oh, Diane Keaton. I'm sorry.
Keaton, sorry.
Diane Keaton.
But yes, I mean that's an example of a movie that if a millennial does not know, they have not in any way lost anything in their life. Because the bitter truth is that the vast majority of films made during the classical period or in any era of Hollywood are garbage. And it takes a while for the good stuff to separate itself out. And what's ironic is that, and especially for younger audiences today, is that the movies that were at one time considered classics are the ones we would rather die than sit through again. I mean, I cannot imagine a film school student saying, I really need to watch Mrs. Miniver. I saw the movie Dunkirk, so now I need to see Mrs. Miniver. I mean, here's a movie that won Best Picture, Actress, and Director, and
it is
unwatchable.
It's unwatchable. It's Walter Pidgeon and Greer Garson, and everybody's so heroic and stiff upper lip, and and then she married the actor who played her son.
In real life, yes.
In real life, yes.
Oh, wow.
It's
Cougars.
so dated.
I mean, cougars were always around.
Interesting. What was the age difference?
I don't know, 15 years?
15 years.
Yeah, something like that.
So it's not really high cougar land or anything
right.
like that.
No, you're
Medium.
absolutely correct.
Yeah.
I just want to ask a question, and maybe Michael can answer
Please.
this. What do you think millennials sitting down to watch Casablanca, the 72% who haven't seen it, or they probably heard of it, but haven't seen it. What do you think their issue with it would be, a film like Casablanca? I mean, would they be laughing at things, or
Who hadn't
Yes.
seen it?
who hadn't seen it?
Especially the scene with the lady with the banjo
Well,
plays.
yeah, I think it would be tough today to watch it in terms of cultural context and time, being it post, World War II, and maybe getting some of the references and stuff.
Right.
But I think ultimately with that specific film, I mean, this doesn't necessarily apply to every single film, but that specific film, I think even with that, like that handicap, I think you can still appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I think the other, that's a dumb question. No, producer just put up a question. But I think one of the other things that I would say is also, the story is so good that you can get past that. I don't think that,
Yeah.
I think, just like with anything else, if you don't understand the references, the smarter folks are going to go look that up. Like,
Yeah.
oh wait, what was that he said?
Right.
I didn't understand that.
Right.
I have my phone. What was that?
Right.
So I think they'll kind of get behind that, but also that the story is that good that even with that being a handicap, you can still enjoy it nevertheless.
I have a story to tell, and he's not a millennial, but about 4 or 5, 7 or 8 years ago, there was a party at a friend's house with about 10 or 15 close friends, and we were watching Saturday Night Fever, which is a classic. And a young man who was in his 30s had never, ever seen it, and was a baby when it was made, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe wasn't even born. And I've seen that film.
41 years old now.
I've seen that film
I felt I had to say that to shock you.
many times. I've seen it many times. I saw it in the theater when it came out. I read the script when it was in production, and the film opens, and he's laughed he laughed through the whole film at the clothing, at the dancing, and he's a very bright young man, an actor, and he was laughing at it. He was making fun of it and wasn't taking it seriously. Yeah, when you look at those clothes, they're ridiculous, and I am guilty of wearing all that polyester. But the thing is that he was unable to settle in and follow the story and the characters. So even somebody, an intelligent young man who's in the business, had difficulty with a film that is a classic.
But I think that the caliber of those two films are different. I mean, you have this dance film, and then you have, you know, Humphrey Bogart trying to defeat the Nazis, so to speak. So yeah, I kind of get why he might not take that as serious.
Well, our producer put up a very interesting question, which was, Bogart is ugly. Yes.
He's a beautiful man.
This
What are you
was
talking
exactly
about?
why Casablanca, during the early days of the revival of interest in classic films, was so popular. And today, that reputation isn't anywhere near what it was 30 years ago. And it's because Bogart, and it's because he was fitting in with the rise of the unattractive actors, the Robert De Niro's, the Dustin Hoffmans, the Al Pacinos. And what we've seen, and his existential angst, was fitting of the period. And now we have so many younger actors who have that. Casablanca is one thing. Dead Reckoning is another. That there's a lot of Bogart films that do not hold up. I mean, I defy anyone to really sit through Beat the Devil. And the Truman Capote script and cult following notwithstanding, and actually like it.
I watched The Barefoot Contessa recently. I have to disagree. He's not, to say Bogart is ugly, the camera loved him.
It loved him, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he wasn't a Matthew McConaughey.
No, he was not Matthew McConaughey. He wasn't a screen idol. But you don't look at him and go, ooh, he's ugly. You can't not watch him when he's on screen, and that's the litmus test. And that scene in Casablanca, that close-up of him with Bergman, where they're embracing, it's absolutely classic. So for me, it's way beyond, you know, the description of a face or whether he's good looking or his teeth or whatever, is that when he was on screen, you could not take your eyes off of him.
He has tremendous camera charisma. I mean,
Yes.
just by contrast, look at Paul Henry in that, who was coming off of now Voyager. So here he is, this big romantic lead actor, and every time he's on the screen, you just want to turn away.
Yeah, well, you just go whatever. Whatever. You're playing your part. We know you're the big hero. But and I think there are classic themes. Now, I would like to say that for a lot of millennials who will sit down and watch these, and a lot of it is that how do we expose them to this, you know?
Well, the first thing is to have an understanding that when you watch something in black and white and you didn't grow up the way we did with black and white television sets, that there is a minor sense of sensory deprivation that people go through when they're watching a black and white movie, particularly in a theater. And it causes a slightly nervous reaction. And once you let people know that, yes, you're going to have this weird sense of sensory deprivation, you're not going to know where it came from, and it's going to make you nervous, it's not because you're not responding to the movie, it's because you're responding to the fact that you're missing a sense that because it's an interpreted thing, it's not something you grew up with and where it was normal, that it does take a little bit of getting used to.
But it also feels spoiled and self-indulgent. Ooh, it's black and white. Come on, you know.
It's the same with reading subtitles. There's a reason why something that's dubbed is very preferable to reading subtitles. I know that probably my bosses have just fainted, but in reality, most of the world deals with subtitles. That doesn't deal with subtitles. They deal with dubbing. Because when you watch something that's subtitled, you lose so much of the movie.
Because you're reading.
You're reading the movie. You're not looking at the images. You're not really getting a sense of the language because you're stuck with 260 character lines for each line of the subtitle.
I have to just mention something that when I was a millennial, when I was 23, 24 years old, and my husband was older than me and more educated, and I had grown up in an educated home and gone to this very fine school, and yet I had my limitations. And he took me to the Thalia Theater on the Upper West Side, which was the art theater in New York City. And he took me to see Satyajit Ray, took me to see The World of Apu. And he said, come on, have you ever seen any Indian films? I said, no. And he said, come on. And I was just a spoiled little brat. And I said, no, I don't want to go see that. India, there's poverty and these people, these poor people, I don't want to see poor people. And India, you know, I had a very closed mind for an educated young woman. And he said, come on, come on. And of course, it's the universal themes. Black and white, subtitles, not the best, the film is old, and it rises above all those limitations because of its, the universality of the theme, the human spirit, blah, 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 and great storytelling and in interesting characters. So for me, my aesthetic is, I come from how deeply am I going to invest in what happens to these people on screen? And what's the story? Tell me a story. Tell me a story where if the film breaks in the middle or whatever the digital thing does, I'm going to be really annoyed and upset and anxious because I want to know what happens, and then what happens, and then what happens. That to me is the basis of all of it. And I think that it's not our task to go out there and get the millennials to see the classic films that we enjoyed and that are still viable. The thing about Casablanca is he's the classic anti-hero. It's the hero's journey, the reluctant hero who wants to protect his turf and doesn't want to go on that journey, and he succumbs to the angels of his better nature. That's classic. And so I think that exposing millennials to these films is a great goal. I don't know how you do it, except for those who come to classes that we teach in or others teach in. But for me, I am so grateful, and I know Dan and I come from very different viewpoints, but I know I'm grateful that I have a sense of history and an appreciation of films that were made way before I was born or when I was born, And that,
unfortunately for you and I, there's way too many movies that were made while we were alive.
While we were alive, yeah.
So we don't have that joy of discovering them. We already know them.
Yes. And I'm wondering if I want to ask, because I'm going to ask, do we think, and I don't want to diss millennials, but there is a sense among a lot of young people, not all, and even older people, with the cell phone and the narcissism and the selfies and what's happening right now, and a show like about Kylie Jenner, one of the Bruce Jenner's kid with what's her name, and I was watching because I used to watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians years ago, and there was some interesting stuff going on. And this girl, all she does is have plastic surgery. She's 20, and she just takes selfies, and she has followers. She has this aimless kind of life where she makes a lot of money, and she's got a TV show.
Blow Up.
Yeah.
It's like Blow Up. It's like La Ventura.
Yes, and I'm thinking, is a lot of this disinterest
Movies
in
you don't
history.
need to see, by the way.
Yes, and disinterest in history, does it have to do with kind of a narcissism and a focus on what's happening right now and what's the next thing?
I wouldn't pretend to say that there isn't a level of narcissistic behavior in millennials. In particular, of course, with your selfies and having to stream everything and all of that. But at the same time, I would also say that I don't necessarily think, I wouldn't blame that or say that there is not an appreciation. And I'll give you an example. So with what you were saying, I think it's Kylie Jenner, specifically her company, recently came out, I think this was like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. Actually, it's been over the last 2 months, actually, that she's been doing this. Has a company with like t-shirts and makeup and other stuff, and keeps putting these products out, but keeps ripping other people off and ripping off other artists. So for example, she put out a line of t-shirts that had, I'm not joking, that you can look this up, would have like a prominent artist. So let's say, a prominent music figure, like Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, or The Doors, or
David Bowie?
No, not David Bowie. It was a little more up, like 90s kind of nostalgia with Tupac, Biggie, these kinds of people. And then what she did, I'm not joking, so she had the image of that and then put her like face on top of that. Put her like print, I'm like, I'm just looking at, yeah, exactly. Our sound guy just killed himself. I saw this and I fell out of my chair going, no, this is like, I'm thinking, no, this isn't real. This is a joke. This is completely 100%
Is she getting
serious.
sued?
And she absolutely got sued. She got so many letters from cease and desists and all of this from the estates of some of these people, because some of them are dead, like obviously with the Doors or Kurt Cobain and whatever. So what I say is I think, yes, that exists, that level of narcissistic behavior exists, and just money grabbing and whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But there's a lot of us out there that are like, no.
Yeah.
No, this is too much.
Right.
There's a level that we're willing to tolerate, and then it's like, okay, you need to pull it back.
Yeah.
So I think, and she very much got put in her place because she got blasted on social media, big time for it. Had to apologize, and of course had to take the line down from that.
And this was done by
Yeah.
advisors. I mean, these were people who should know better.
I mean, I can't. Honestly, when I look at these shirts, it looks like she tried to just herself do a screen print of her face on these things. But I'm like,
conflating this ego.
So
conflating.
so I think that's the perfect example of I think what you're talking about, where they're millennials, quote unquote millennials, trying to forget the history or the past
Yeah.
of things. But there's those of us who are like, no, this is no, you
Yeah.
can't do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
especially when she put her face on. I think the one that really bothered me was Tupac and The Doors. When I saw that, I'm like,
Well,
you cannot be that self-involved. You cannot possibly think yourself better than those two. You can't. I'm sorry.
It's emblematic, and I don't think I think because of everything is so out there now, everything is so accessible. But there have
Yeah.
always been people like that, and
Of
there were
course.
always
Zsa
been
Zsa
people-
Gabor.
yeah, we had the Gabor sisters. So I think that the dissing of millennials is unfair. That there are some who are like that, but there are people our age who are like that, and I just think that I just feel sorry. I feel bad for people who don't have a sense of film history, who only want to go to the latest film, who are just into the franchises or don't have the patience or the interest. But there have always been people like that. There have always been
It's the
people.
vast majority of audiences.
Absolutely.
Movies outside of the big cities are social events. You go with your friends
Right.
as a cheap date, as a way to hang out, and then that's why on the big cities there's this horror at the thought of going in the middle of a movie and coming and leaving where you came in. But for most people, it's like, why not?
Yeah,
we're
or-
just gonna
yes.
go and get signed in after this.
And people, when you get out of, when you're in the business and then you go to like my hometown or Boston or whatever, that they leave before the credits are over. And I'm sitting watching the credits because I know people. So I think that I'm just going to continue to watch the older movies and continue to try and expose the students I come into contact with the AFI's list of the 100 greatest American films and the 100 greatest foreign films, that it's not just I need to be educated, but how enjoyable so many of them are as a film experience, no matter when they were made, So millennials, we love you. Get off your phones, watch some old movies, take a class. And then and turn off your phones. That's what I would say. There's one more.
I'm going to be contrarian. I'm going to say, when I was growing up, I was obsessed with my home video recorder, and I was recording everything. My parents thought my life was ruined because I spent too much time in front of the TV, and maybe they were
Yes.
right. But it did lead to my career. So I'd say that if you're into technology, embrace it, because
Yeah.
you never know, your job might
Yes.
find itself in that. And I
Yeah.
want to leave the last word to Michael, to kind of give your sense of what a historic past can mean for someone who's looking at this as a career.
Oh, absolutely. I think, I came to it a little differently. I think in terms of coming into the history of it, and I don't know if this still, I'm sure it still happens today, but older films, when they come on for reruns for like your TCMs or other channels, Wizard of Oz coming on or whatever, but also bad 60s, 70s, and 80s horror films too. That's kind of where I came
absolutely.
into it. So I think, especially for if you're going to be any kind of filmmaker, writer, whatever, you have to watch those. You have to. There's no excuse, because the second that you see that, you can actually, because the vast majority of those films, not great, they're not terrible, they're kind of mediocre, so you can avoid and circumnavigate those pitfalls. An example I would use is the one that I just watched last night, Return of the Creepers, or Night of the Creepers, I'm sorry, 1987 or 1986 film, bad B-level horror film, and I'm sitting there watching it, and it's so badly cut, put together, but it's funny because at its core, it's actually pretty good. It's actually a good story of Skater Dater or whatever. But I think, again, you have to watch these films in order to not fall into that, not to fall into those cliches, not to fall into those pitfalls, and also appreciate when you do see a good film. You're like, oh, okay, got it.
And also,
have that benchmark.
even appreciate the effort that the people put into, you know, you have to
Right.
respect the filmmakers, even when the film is bad. I will have a postscript to all of this
Okay.
that may be another subject, but for me, where the gold is right now is television.
Yeah.
Is the gold is right, but that's another
another total,
another podcast. Millennials, we love you very much. That's it for us today. Like and subscribe to the Unscripted Network, please. I'm Saran Fox,
Dan Watanabe.
Michael Gonzalez.
and this has been Dan and Saran Take on Hollywood. We will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.